There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. 62 words into the most famous television interview ever recorded.
You try and hurt yourself on the outside because you want help. There's no better way to dismantle a personality than to isolate it.
Princess Diana ended the fairy tale in front of 23 million people, and for 25 years the BBC called it the crown jewel of British journalism, the scoop of the century, the night a princess spoke her truth to the world. Except that's not how it started. That's not how it started at all, because in 2021 an official inquiry, led by a former senior judge, Lord Dyson, confirmed exactly how that interview was obtained, not with charm, not with trust, with forged bank statements, fake documents, mocked up by a BBC graphic designer on the instructions of the reporter, and used to convince Diana that the people closest to her, her own staff, her own allies, were secretly being paid to spy on her and sell her out. The scoop of the century began with a crime of paperwork. And here's the part that should stop you cold. The BBC didn't find out in 2021. The BBC found out within months of the broadcast. It knew, and it buried what it knew for 2.5 decades. Now I'm going to walk you through the whole thing, the forgery, the cover-up, the man who did it. But I have to tell you about one moment up front, because it's the strangest part of the entire story, and it isn't the forgery. It's what the BBC did with Martin Bashir in 2016, 20 years after they first learned what he'd done. When I tell you the job title they handed him, you're going to think I made it up. Hold that thought. I'll pay it off, I promise. Let's start with the trap, because before you can understand the cover-up, you have to understand that the BBC investigated this once before and got the answer completely backwards. It was 1996. The interview had aired the previous November, and almost immediately, that graphic designer, the man who'd actually made the fake statements, started raising the alarm inside the building. He said, in effect, "Look what I was asked to produce." So the BBC did the responsible thing on paper. It launched an internal investigation. It was overseen at the top by a man named Tony Hall, who would later go on to become the Director General of the entire corporation, and that investigation reached a conclusion. It decided that Martin Bashir was, and I'm quoting the spirit of it here, honest and honourable. The reporter was cleared, and the whistleblower, the designer who'd told the truth about his own work, he was the one who ended up out of a job. Now hold that 1996 verdict in one hand. In the other, put the 2021 Dyson inquiry. Same institution, same facts, same documents. And Dyson found that Bashir had engaged in deceitful behaviour, in serious breach of the BBC's own producer guidelines, and that the 1996 internal investigation had been woefully ineffective. Woefully ineffective. That's a retired judge's polite way of saying the BBC looked straight at it and waved it through. Same evidence, opposite verdicts. And the only thing that changed between 1996 and 2021 was whether somebody on the outside was finally watching. Which lands us on the question the BBC has never been able to answer cleanly. And I want you to actually pick a side on this one, because your answer decides how you see everything that follows. There are 2 doors here, and both of them are bad. Door 1. In 1996, the investigators genuinely couldn't find what Dyson found in 2021. They looked, and they missed it. If you walk through that door, here's what it costs the BBC, because it means the world's most trusted news organisation is simply not capable of investigating itself. And if that's true, then every single time the BBC has ever looked into its own conduct and cleared itself, that verdict now carries the same doubt. Every one. Door 2, and this is the darker one, they didn't miss it. They found it, or found enough of it, and they looked away. Because the interview was too big, the awards were too shiny, the scoop was too historic to lose. They knew, and they decided that knowing was inconvenient.
Incompetent or complicit, that's the choice. And notice, there's no comfortable version. People want to reach for a middle answer, some gentle, well, mistakes were made, fog. But there isn't one here. A forged document isn't a matter of interpretation. It either got caught or it got covered. And I genuinely want you to tell me in the comments which one you land on, because there is no third door here. Either the watchdog couldn't do its job, job or it chose not to. And remember what this organisation is. This is the BBC, the outfit whose entire reason for existing is to hold power to account, to fact-check the powerful, to be the thing you can trust when you can't trust anyone else. It failed the one fact-check that was ever fully, completely in its own hands. The burglar was the watchdog. The watchdog was the burglar. So type it below. Incompetent or complicit? I read these and I already know this one's going to split the room. Now let's talk about what the deception actually set in motion, because this is the part where it stops being a media story and becomes something much heavier. And I want to walk it in order, because the order is the whole point. Start with the forged statements themselves, what they were designed to do, and what they did was make Diana believe she was surrounded by traitors. The fake documents were mocked up to look like real bank records, and they appeared to show that senior, trusted people in her orbit were being secretly paid to leak information about her, payments from shadowy sources to people she'd relied on, and it worked. By multiple accounts, it fed a spiral of fear and suspicion. She pulled away from people who had been genuinely loyal. Her sense of who she could trust, already fragile, already frayed by everything else in her life at that point, came apart at exactly the moment she needed it most. Understand what that means. The fear wasn't real. It was manufactured. Someone sat down and built it on purpose out of paper and handed it to a woman who was already drowning. Then the timeline speeds up. Within roughly a year of that interview, the machinery of her life changed shape completely. The divorce was finalized. The letters HRH, Her Royal Highness, removed from her name. Her royal protection, the security detail, no longer in place the way it had been. And then, in the summer of 1997, Paris. I'm going to be very careful here because this deserves care. I am not going to sit here and sell you a conspiracy theory. I'm not. But I don't have to, because I can just tell you what's on the record. Her brother, Earl Spencer, has stated publicly and directly that he believes the deceit used to obtain that interview played a part in the chain of events that led to his sister's death. That's not me speculating. That's the man who buried her, on the record. And afterwards, years afterwards, the BBC quietly returned the awards that interview had won, and pledged it would never broadcast the footage again. There was a settlement too, a reported £1.4 million payout to a former royal nanny named Tiggy Leg Burke, whose reputation those forged lies had helped drag through the mud. Sit with that for a second. A public broadcaster paying out over £1 million because of documents its own reporter faked. That is not the price tag of a journalism scandal. That is the price tag of a life coming apart, and an institution slowly, quietly, decades later, trying to put a number on the damage. Okay, this is the moment I promised you right at the start. Let's open it. In 2016, 2 decades after that graphic designer first blew the whistle, with senior BBC figures on record as having known about the forgery allegations since the 90s, the BBC did not quietly show Martin Bashir the door. It did the opposite. It brought him back. It rehired him. And now, the job title. The man who forged bank documents to frighten a grieving, isolated princess into a television studio was made the BBC's religion editor. Religion editor. Say it out loud. Let it land. The corporation put the man whose signature achievement was a fabrication in charge of its coverage of faith, ethics, and morality, of right and wrong, of conscience. This is the beat you'd cut from a satire for being too on the nose. The forger handed the ethics desk, except nobody wrote it. It actually happened, and he held that role for years, until 2021, when he resigned, citing health grounds, just days before the Dyson report was published and the whole thing detonated in public. Days. After 20 years inside the building, he walked out of the door almost exactly as the truth walked in. Read that sequence twice, because it tells you more than any single document ever could. Institutions don't reveal who they really are in their scandals. Every institution has scandals. They reveal who they are in their promotions. And in 2016, knowing what it knew, the BBC promoted him. Quick thing, if you want the rest of these royal stories told straight, with the receipts, no fairy tales and no fake outrage, do me a favour and subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel more than you'd think. Okay, back to it, because we are nowhere near done. Because here's what I want you to understand. This wasn't one
one reporter having one catastrophic lapse. There was a pattern on both sides, his and the institution's. Look at Bashir first. The story didn't start with Diana, and it didn't end with her. The whistleblower who told the truth about the forgery pushed out. And over the years that followed, as Bashir built a glittering career on both sides of the Atlantic, landing another era-defining interview with another famous, vulnerable figure, questions about his methods and his sourcing followed him from network to network. The Diana interview wasn't an aberration in his career, it was the template. But here's the harder truth, and it's about the BBC, not just the man. Bashir didn't corrupt a healthy institution, he read an unhealthy one perfectly. He understood something about the place that the place didn't want to admit about itself, that a serious newsroom, hungry for a historic scoop, will very quietly stop asking how the story was got, the moment the what is spectacular enough. Call it scoop worship. The prize was so enormous that nobody with the power to ask questions really wanted the answers. Bashir saw that, and he used it. Now, to be fair, and I always want to be fair, there were apologies, eventually. So let's actually look at them, because how someone apologizes tells you everything. The BBC issued what it called an unconditional apology. Unconditional. And it was 25 years late, and only after an outside judge had dragged every fact into the daylight. An apology that only arrives once you've been caught, once the escape routes are all closed, isn't quite an apology. It's a surrender with nicer wording. And then there's Bashir's own defense, which is the part that really gives the game away. He argued that the forged statements had no bearing on Diana's decision to talk, that she wanted to do the interview anyway. Read that again. That is a man who forged documents, and then decades later defended himself by pointing to the willingness of the woman he deceived. The forgery didn't matter, he says, because she wanted it. That's not remorse. That's blaming the victim for being deceivable. And here's the detail that unmasks the whole thing. He offered that defense while also insisting that he had loved Diana, loved her. I'll let you sit with the logic of that one. You do not mock up fake bank statements to terrify someone you love into your studio chair. You just don't. The two things cannot live in the same sentence. And the audience always knows the difference between someone who's sorry for the harm and someone who's sorry about the timing. And the timing here was 25 years. Which brings us to the heart of it, the moral of the whole thing. And I want to say it plainly. Written above the entrance to the BBC's broadcasting house in Latin is a line about nations speaking peace unto nation. The whole founding idea of the place was that truth is a public trust, that you could turn on the BBC and know that what you were being told had been checked and verified and earned honestly. That was the promise carved into the building. And its proudest single moment, the interview it called its crown jewel for a quarter of a century, was built on forged paper and a frightened woman's manufactured paranoia. The institution that exists to verify the truth was, in its most celebrated hour, the fabrication. And that's a different kind of failure than one bad story. A bad story you correct. A retraction, an apology, you move on. But this wasn't a bad story. This was the flagship, the one they put in the trophy case. Because when the referee is the one cheating, it's not one match that's ruined. It's the whole idea of the game. Every other story that newsroom ever told, every scoop, every expose, every time it pointed a finger at someone else's dishonesty, now has to be looked at through the memory of the one it faked and then hid for 25 years. So where does that leave the interview? Let's walk the room and count who's still willing to stand beside it today, because that number tells you everything. Prince William gave one of the rawest statements any royal has ever put on camera. He said the interview should never be aired again, not ever, and that the deceitful way it was obtained had fed his mother's, and I'm quoting him, fear, paranoia, and isolation in her final years. That's her son, on the record, saying the BBC's crown jewel helped break his mother. And his brother, Harry, a man who these days agrees with William on almost nothing, a man who has aired more family grievances in public than any royal in living memory, agrees with him on this completely. On this one thing, after everything, the two of them stand in exactly the same place. That should tell you how far beyond dispute it is. When those two brothers land on the same side of anything, you're not looking at opinion anymore. You're looking at something they both watched happen to their mother. And Earl Spencer, as we've heard, goes further still. And the BBC? The BBC has effectively disowned its own masterpiece, returned the awards, locked the tape away, pledged never to show it again. Think about that. When an institution's single greatest triumph becomes the thing it is most ashamed of, when it would rather the crowning achievement of its history simply vanish, then the cover-up cover-up didn't protect the legacy. The cover-up became the legacy. And here's the part that can never be undone. The interview can't be unbroadcast. 23 million people watched it. It rewrote how the world saw a marriage, a monarchy, a woman. The chain of events that followed ran all the way to a tunnel in Paris, and none of it can be run backwards. Every door behind this story is locked. But here's what genuinely stays with me: the unsolved part. Because Lord Dyson answered one question and answered it well. What did Martin Bashir do? We know that now. It's documented. It's fact. But there's a second question the inquiry never fully mapped. Not what did Bashir do, but who knew and who decided to keep knowing quietly for 25 years. Think about how many hands that file had to pass through. How many managers, how many lawyers, how many executives over a quarter of a century must have opened that folder, understood exactly what it contained, and quietly closed it again. Chose the scoop, chose the silence, chose the reputation of the institution over the truth about a dead woman. Most of those names were never called to account. They weren't cleared by an investigation. They were cleared by retirement, by time, by the file simply outliving anyone's willingness to ask. So here's the question the inquiry never fully answered, and I genuinely want your theory below. Not about Bashir. We know about Bashir. My question is about everyone else. Over 25 years, how many people do you think opened that file, saw exactly what it was, and quietly closed it again? Was it a handful, or was it an entire culture? Tell me what you think really happened in those 25 years of silence. And if you want the next thread pulled, because the story doesn't end in that BBC studio, it ends in that Paris tunnel, and there are questions about that night, about a white Fiat Uno that was never fully traced, that people have been asking for nearly 30 years. That one's waiting for you right here. I'll see you in it.